report our income and then deduct our expenses. And there are so many people who manufacture expenses, exaggerate, and hire professionals to help them make it less of a burden to pay each year. And it appears that the whole tax thing is really extraordinarily simple. It rests on certain fundamental constitutional principles and statutes that have not changed, statutes that are actually quite easy to understand. But there aren't a lot of people who have been able to penetrate this more than 3 million word Internal Revenue Code. So I want to introduce you to one of them who has. And I think we have Pete on the line. Are you there?
Hello, Sophia. How are you?
Hi, Pete. Well, as I said, it's really an honor for me to have you here. And I hope that in this next couple of hours you'll be able to enlighten a lot of people.
Well, I hope so, too. And it's an honor and a pleasure to be with you.
Well, Pete, should we start with some of the common misunderstandings about tax?
Sure. That sounds like a good place to start. And in fact, the most important of those, perhaps, is the carefully cultivated, widely held misunderstanding that income, as used in the context of the income tax, is the common word that we are accustomed to using in everyday speech, and that we would find defined in Webster's as all that comes in. And nothing could be further from the truth. The federal government, in fact, is prohibited constitutionally from imposing a tax on all that comes in. Such a tax would be would be a capitation. It would meet the specific definition of a capitation. Capitations are prohibited unless apportioned.
So capitation is a direct tax.
It is a direct tax. It's a tax on revenue in general.
Right, and the income tax is not a direct tax.
Well, it can't be. If it were, it would be unconstitutional. It isn't unconstitutional because, as it happens, it is an excise tax. It is a federal claim on a piece of the action, the gains resulting from the use of its own property, privileges, and prerogatives. And that's all it is. It's the same kind of tax that you could apply to your neighbor if he came over to your house proposing to set up a lemonade stand at the end of your driveway because it was the best spot in town, and you were to say, that's fine, you can do that, but I want 10% of the proceeds.
All right, well, we're going off for a short break, and we'll be back to understand the rest of this. This is Sophia with Pete Hendrickson, my guest today, talking about the real truth of income tax. Pete, you were just telling us that the income tax is only that which the federal government has an ownership interest in, right?
That's right. It's a subset of what we would use the common word income to represent. Common word income means all that comes in. Income within the context of the tax law is a specialized subset of revenue that is characterized by its connection to the gainful use of a federal prerogative, power, or privilege. And once that concept sinks in, it really is the key to understanding everything else about the tax. Well, that by itself, and also one other factor that's important to understand, and this is more general, and this is just a fact of statutory construction. It's a rule of statutory construction that the drafters are allowed to presume that whoever is reading a law understands things like the context within which the law is being produced and to which it relates. And so they can use the word income. In the case of using it in a statute, it becomes a term. They can use that without explanation, without further explanation, because it's the responsibility of the person reading and applying and relying on that statutory language to know that what's being spoken of here is something that exists within a particular context. If it's a federal law, it necessarily is going to involve federal things, and this is true in the case of the income tax, like in any other law. So knowing that income is a subset, and income within the context of the tax law is a subset of general revenue, and it has to be because otherwise the income tax would be a capitation, and since it's not apportioned, it then would be unconstitutional. In fact, being the specialized subset and only confining itself to things, to revenues that are produced by voluntary activities of Americans. No one is obliged to do anything involving federal power, prerogative, or privileges. It's something that we would voluntarily engage in, just as your neighbor would voluntarily bring his lemonade stand over and set it up on your driveway. Nobody's forcing him to do that. Therefore, for you to take 10% of the proceeds is not for you to involuntarily seize money from him. This is something that he will have agreed to. And the same thing is true in this case, in the case of the income tax.
Right. So what you're saying is there has to be like a direct and recognized working relationship between the person who is taxed and the person who is taxing.
Well, it actually even goes beyond that, because the things that are taxed under the income tax are explicitly spelled out. It isn't just that, yes, there must be this. Certainly that does have to be a characteristic of what is taxed as income, but what those things are explicitly laid out, and tax law requires that. That's also a matter of doctrine, that taxes can't be applied in some vague fashion.
So this idea that a lot of people have, that there's no law that says they have to pay income tax, is actually a misconception.
It's absolutely a misconception. There is a law that says anyone who earns or collects, comes into possession of gains proceeding from the exercise of a taxable activity, which is to say the use of federal power, prerogative, or privileges, in more than the exemption amount, owes a tax on that gain. And that law is very clear. It is when one has collected gain beyond the exemption amount that one becomes made liable for a corresponding tax. And so there absolutely is a law. It's very clear. It's laid out with crystal clarity on my website, losthorizons.com. I have that law laid out. In particular, a variety of sections that altogether comprise the means by which an individual becomes liable for the tax, and so yeah, it's very straightforward. And indeed, it's an unfortunate myth within what we think of as the tax honesty community that there is no such law.